What would you do if the person you built a life with slept with half her law firm? This isn't just a story about betrayal, it's about precision. About turning the rules she used against me into weapons she couldn't see coming. From courtroom humiliation to the sound of coins echoing off marble steps, I played the long game and made sure she lost everything that really mattered. This is Cheating Stories 7, and if you enjoy gripping tales of betrayal and revenge, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, let's step into the story of my wife slept with half her law firm. My revenge left her with nothing. The polished wood of Department 6 gleamed under the courtroom lights, so reflective you could almost see your own face flinch. I didn't. My palms stayed flat on the cool wooden rail, steady, as Judge Coleman began to read the numbers. His voice was calm, almost detached, as if he were calling out a raffle no one wanted to win. $2,000 a month in spousal maintenance, $1,000 for child support, health insurance until the minor child reaches the age of majority, and continued mortgage payments on the Fairview Heights house, a house that had never truly felt like mine. From the corner of my vision, the bailiff's gaze slid briefly to Vanessa Ward, my ex in everything but the signature, and then back to me as though trying to gauge which of us would break first. Vanessa didn't break. She smiled. It wasn't joy, it was the polished, controlled smile of someone who had turned the outcome into a performance and believed they had just nailed the final act. My name is Marcus Kane. I build quiet businesses, coin kiosks tucked into grocery store foyers, rental houses that earn enough to cover their next coat of paint, vending machines that never complain about working the night shift. I grew up in Brookside, where people know the price of a single bolt and remember the man who taught you how to turn it. I believed marriage would be like Brookside, plain, sturdy, something you maintain with your own two hands. But then Vanessa took a position at a Boston law firm with floor-to-ceiling windows and partners who practiced the art of being seen. She learned quickly that if you laughed at the right moments, certain doors unlocked by themselves. Somewhere in that hall of glass and whispered ambition, my marriage became nothing more than a reflection, something I could see but never touch again. "Is there anything you'd like to say, Mr. Kane?" Judge Coleman asked, leaning back in his chair as if my dignity were just another mildly interesting exhibit in a courthouse full of them. I wanted to ask him if he knew the price of fairness, what it truly cost. Instead, I swallowed the bitterness and said, "I will comply, Your Honor." The word comply felt metallic in my mouth, like holding pennies on your tongue. Vanessa's lawyer, one of those polished men whose cufflinks seem to do all the talking, thanked the court for its balanced approach. He avoided my eyes. Vanessa didn't. Her gaze moved over me in a slow, deliberate sweep, the same way her hand used to rest on my shoulder when we were still the kind of couple who split a ladder and painted at twilight. She held my eyes a second too long, a message perfectly composed without a single word. "You can't win here." Behind us, Claire, 15 and fighting hard not to show emotion, sat like a shadow cast in marble. She had wanted to speak, to tell the court she preferred our little Brookside house with its squeaky stare over the silent, cold grandeur of Fairview Heights. But Coleman had already decided no child would testify about the adults who had built the cage around her. He cited a sealed report, one I would never be allowed to read. Claire's head lowered. Alexis Morneau, the clinical psychologist I'd brought in for Claire because help is better than anger, placed two quiet fingers on her shoulder. In rooms like this, silence is the only thing that can't be cross-examined. The gavel came down, not a bang, but a click. Deals like this didn't need thunder when signatures would do. Outside, the winter light spilled across the courthouse steps, making everyone look a little more honest than they were. Reporters drifted toward bigger scandals. Ours was too small, too domestic, just the kind that breaks families instead of governments. Vanessa moved toward her colleagues, their laughter trimmed down to office-safe decibels. Claire walked straight to me, rigid when I hugged her, holding back tears so as not to give Vanessa the satisfaction. "I tried, Dad," she whispered. "I know," I said, and I meant it. I knew the courage it took to even try in that room. I knew the sting of being told to sit back down. Driving home, Boston's brick rows flickered past like frames from a film I no longer belonged in. I thought about the day we bought the Brookside place. The porch sagging like an old back, the roof muttering in every storm, the kitchen promising it could hold one more Thanksgiving if we were gentle. Vanessa had called it charming, and I had believed her. Later she called Brookside limiting, and like a fool in love, I believed her again. That's the thing about love, you can't always hear the tone through your favorite voice. By the time I parked, the taste of compliance had shifted. It no longer tasted like pennies. It tasted like a plan. I would follow every line of the decree precisely, exactly. And if the law spoke in letters, then I would remind her. Letters can be sharp. Child support would go into a trust, with Claire as the only signatory, funds released only for school, therapy, or clothes that made her feel like herself, not a lawyer's daughter in someone else's costume. Insurance for Claire would be platinum. My anger at the world would never be an excuse to be cheap with my child's health. As for Vanessa's coverage, the decree didn't say gold or comfort. It said insurance. Catastrophic coverage would be perfectly legal and perfectly cold. The mortgage, the decree said continue to pay. It didn't say I had to call it a home. The payments would route through a separate account designed for one purpose, to do exactly what the paper said. No cards, no notes. And the $2,000 in spousal support each month, the toll a judge had decided I must pay for leaving. That would be coins. Coins don't bounce. They land. And when they land, they make a sound you can't ignore. I called David, my brother, the only man who could tell me I was wrong and then stay to help me fix it. I need a trust structure for Claire, I told him. Tight, audit-proof, no leakage to Vanessa. Done, he said, and Marcus, no fireworks. No fireworks, I promised, just compliance. Next, I called an old contact from my vending machine days. Can you do a residential drop? Legal, he asked. Perfectly, I said, and it would be a signed receipt, an itemized manifest, an amount that matched the decree to the cent. Let the neighbors gossip, I wouldn't even have to speak. When I hung up, I noticed the tremor in my hands, a protest from the body when the mind starts sketching revenge. I set them flat on the kitchen table, just as I had in the courtroom, until they went still. Claire sat across from me, jacket still on, chin lifted in that way children learn when adults keep missing the point. Are we okay? She asked. We're going to be, I told her. Not today, but soon. I don't want to live there, she said, and she didn't need to specify which there she meant. You won't, I said, and in that moment the vow was heavier than anything a judge could order. That night I stood in the doorway of her old bedroom, the one with the sticking window and the tattling floorboard, the dent in the shelf from when I dropped her favorite book. I'd lost many things that day, the right to be believed quickly, the comforting lie that fairness is obvious. But I hadn't lost the one thing that mattered. In the morning, I would sign what needed signing, fund what needed funding, and schedule what needed scheduling. I would be the dull blade that never chips. And the world would learn the same lesson Brookside taught me. If you can't get justice, you get precise. The idea settled in my mind that same night as I sat alone in the kitchen, counting the spaces between the refrigerator's low hum and the steady rhythm of Claire's breathing down the hallway. The decree had ordered compliance, but it had never said it had to be convenient. If the court wanted me to pay Vanessa $2,000 a month in spousal maintenance, then I would do exactly that. But how she received it, that was a detail the law had left wide open, and details were where my kind of justice lived. At 9:00 a.m., the next morning I called an old vendor from my vending machine days, a man whose business was moving armored trucks full of cash for grocery stores, banks, and anyone else who needed a fortress on wheels. Ever done a residential drop? I asked. He hesitated. Legal. Receipt, manifest, signatures, I said, clean as glass. 3 days later, a dull gray armored truck rolled into the pristine streets of Fairview Heights. It moved slowly, its low diesel growl echoing against manicured hedges and polished driveways. 2 guards stepped out, dressed in black uniforms, the kind that made people instinctively stand a little straighter. From across the street, coffee warming my hands, I watched them haul the first heavy canvas bag from the truck. It landed on Vanessa's marble front walk with a deep metallic thud, loud enough to make the sound bounce off the colonnade and carry into the quiet of her perfect neighborhood. She stepped out onto the porch in silk loungewear, her hair still damp from what was probably a salon wash. The morning light caught in the sheen of the fabric, but her steps faltered when she saw the truck, the guards, and the bags. "What is this?" she demanded. "Your support," one guard replied, handing her a clipboard with casual professionalism. $2,000. Rolled quarters, nickels, and dimes. Sign here. Behind the blinds of neighboring homes, shadows shifted. One man, retired, self-appointed HOA enforcer, pretended to fuss with his sprinkler timer, his gaze locked on every detail. Vanessa's smile tightened into a blade. She signed with deliberate strokes, the pen scratching louder than necessary in the still air. Each bag bore a neat stamp with the date, the exact amount, and my business logo in crisp ink. Compliance branded. From my vantage point, I raised my cup in a slow, mocking toast. Her eyes found mine, but for the first time in months, she said nothing. That silence was worth more than the coins themselves. By nightfall, the HOA message board was already lit up. Someone posted, "Anyone know why an armored truck was at Vanessa Ward's house today?" Within minutes, a dozen replies piled in speculation, jokes, thinly veiled curiosity. Not one word from me. I didn't need to answer. Gossip, once set loose, was a self-winding clock. The sound of coins striking marble would echo in Fairview Heights far longer than the truck's engine ever did. Brookside in summer had a smell you could almost hold in your hands. Fresh-cut grass, sun-warmed wood, and the faint tang of charcoal from backyard grills. Even years after I'd left, I could still walk every room of our first house in my mind. The narrow hallway that funneled every laugh into the kitchen, the front porch where Claire had wobbled through her first attempts at balancing on a bike, the fire pit we built from mismatched stones because Vanessa said it made the place look authentic. Back then, she called the squeaky floorboards character. Now, years later, she would dismiss them as a liability. The shift had started slow, almost invisible, like a hairline crack in old wood. When Vanessa joined the Boston firm, I told myself the longer hours were just part of climbing the ladder. The occasional working dinner seemed harmless enough, until occasional became routine. Nights grew longer, the garage stayed silent until midnight, and I learned to tuck Claire into bed without waiting for the sound of Vanessa's car. Then came the charity galas, the carefully curated Instagram posts, the friends who dressed as if they'd stepped straight out of a luxury magazine. Even her laugh had changed. Higher, sharper, like every punchline was a performance meant for someone else. One night she came home with a diamond bracelet I had never seen before. She said it was a gift from the partners for closing a big case. But her eyes didn't meet mine, and in that small avoidance I heard more truth than in all her words. I told myself Brookside had been a phase, that people grow and houses don't. But deep down I knew ambition has teeth, and once it draws blood, it never stops biting. Now, years later, I stood in the small backyard of my current home, the one with the uneven paving stones and a fence that leaned in the wind. I thought about those early cracks, the moments you shrug off, the ones you convince yourself don't matter. Every betrayal starts there as something small, an unreturned call, a glance that lingers too long, a story retold with just enough detail changed to make you question its truth. The armored truck stunt had been just a message, a signal that I was willing to play the game on my terms. But a single move doesn't win a war. Wars are built on campaigns, and campaigns are built on patience. I opened my notebook, the one I kept hidden in a locked drawer, and began to draw, not streets or buildings, but pressure points. Her firm, her reputation, her comforts, the delicate social circles she had traded Brookside for. If Vanessa wanted a life built entirely on appearances, I would make sure every one of those appearances came with a price tag she couldn't ignore. Claire had never been the kind of girl to cry for show. If tears came, it meant something inside her had finally run out of room, like a dam cracking under pressure. That afternoon, she sat at my kitchen table, the same spot where she once ate cereal in cartoon pajamas, her knees tucked up, hair sticking in all directions from sleep. But now her shoulders were tighter, her hands folded around a mug she didn't drink from, her voice quieter than I'd heard in months. "I can't stay there anymore, Dad," she said, not looking at me. "It's like every time I walk into that house, I'm part of some picture I don't belong in." I knew exactly what she meant. I'd lived in that picture once, Vanessa arranging throw pillows that no one ever leaned on, plating dinners we couldn't pronounce for people we didn't like. The rooms always smelled faintly of expensive candles, but never of anything real. Claire wasn't talking about furniture or decor. She was talking about the cold, the staged conversations, the way her mother's attention was portioned out like it was on a ration given only to whoever made her look better in that moment. "Did something happen?" I asked carefully. She hesitated. "Not one thing, it's everything. The rules keep changing. If I wear something she doesn't like, it's unprofessional. If I ask to see you more, I'm being manipulated." Voice cracked just enough to reveal the strain beneath. "I'm not stupid, Dad. I know what she's doing." There was a part of me that wanted to promise her it would be over soon, but custody orders aren't wish lists, and Judge Coleman had already made it clear he wasn't going to let Claire live with me full time. She knew the system was stacked against her. What she needed was to know that I wasn't. "You'll never have to doubt that," I said. "You're my kid. That's permanent." She blinked hard, nodding, her fingers tightening around the mug. We talked about school, about her friends, about little things that might lighten the air, but the truth stayed there between us, solid and unmoving. I couldn't change the court's decision, not yet, but I could change the ground she stood on. That night after she left, I opened a new trust account in her name only. Any expense for her, school trips, sports fees, clothes, even books would come directly from that account. No middleman, no approval from Vanessa. I called David to make sure the structure was airtight. If Vanessa wanted control, I would give her the illusion of it. The reality would belong entirely to Claire. By Monday morning, the metallic thud of coins on marble had grown legs and started walking through Fairview Heights. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It had become a story, whispered from one manicured lawn to another. The HOA group chat, usually reserved for complaints about lawn heights and recycling bins left out too long, was on fire. Someone posted, "Anyone know what that truck was for?" 10 minutes later, another replied, looked like a cash drop. For who, before noon, screenshots had already migrated into private Facebook groups. Names weren't mentioned at first, but it didn't take long for Vanessa's to surface, wrapped in speculation and thinly veiled amusement. I didn't post a single word. I didn't have to. Gossip in places like Fairview Heights was a self-winding clock. You just needed to set the hands once and watch it tick on its own. Around midday, Claire texted me from school. "I think Mom's mad about the coins." I replied, "Tell her it was legal. She'll love that." A moment later, she sent back a single laughing emoji, one of the first I'd seen from her in months. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. David's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "Your little stunt made the rounds at the country club," he said. "One of her friends told a friend of mine that Vanessa nearly threw her phone at the wall." "Good," I said simply. "It means she got the message." And the message wasn't humiliation, though that was a satisfying side effect. It was about control. The decree had dictated how much I had to pay. It had never dictated how. Every month, when she had to haul those heavy bags to the bank, every time a teller rolled their eyes at the absurdity, she would remember. She no longer dictated the terms. To make sure the lesson stuck, I placed a standing order with my armored transport contact, same time, same day, every month. Rolled coins, itemized manifest, signed delivery receipt, all perfectly legal, all perfectly within the lines. That evening, I checked the HOA board one last time. Someone had posted a grainy, zoomed-in photo of the armored truck parked in her driveway. The caption read, "Fairview Heights, where even alimony arrives armored." I went to bed with a smile that didn't fade until morning. For the first time in weeks, I slept without waking in the middle of the night. The sound of coins on marble had a way of echoing, not just through driveways, but through egos. And Vanessa's was built for echoes. I didn't need muscle. I needed eyes, quiet, reliable eyes that could see without being seen and talk without leaving a trace. Boston streets had their own memory, a kind that never faded no matter how many high-rises you built or how many new names appeared on the storefronts. And somewhere inside that memory, I still had a few friends tucked away. One of them was Hawk Miller. We'd met years ago, back when my nights were longer, my business deals more creative, and the lines between legal and illegal were a little blurrier. Hawk had done time, done worse, and somehow ended up as a quiet shot caller inside MCI Norfolk. He was the kind of man who could make a rumor move faster than a phone signal and twice as far. We met in the prison visitors' room, plastic chairs bolted to the floor, tables scuffed from years of restless hands, and the smell of burnt, institutional coffee hanging in the air. Hawk grinned the moment he saw me, like we'd just run into each other in line at a corner deli. "Marcus Kane," he said, settling into the chair opposite me. "What's the play?" "Information," I told him. "Schedules, patterns, little details that seem boring until you know exactly how to use them." He studied me for a moment, his expression sharpening. "You're not looking to get her hurt." "No," I said, steady. "I want her exposed, cleanly, no blood, just truth in the right hands." Hawk leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table in thought. "Then you need Rico Vega. He's quiet, careful, knows how to disappear in plain sight, and lucky for you, he's already halfway inside where you need him." It turned out Rico worked part-time for a cleaning subcontractor servicing corporate offices downtown, including by pure coincidence the Boston law firm where Vanessa worked. That coincidence was too perfect to ignore. 2 weeks later, Rico called from a blocked number. His voice was calm, almost bored, like he was reporting the weather. "They've got a rhythm up there," he said. "5th floor, blinds down after 7, same 3 or 4 faces, laughter, music, sometimes champagne. The married ones leave late." I didn't ask for photos, not yet. Rico's real value wasn't in snapshots, it was in the timeline, who stayed late, which nights, what company they kept when the office went quiet. Meanwhile, on paper, I was just another divorced dad keeping busy, managing the kiosks, checking rent rolls for the duplexes, handling service calls. But in the quiet between those tasks, I started connecting dots. Dots that, given time, would form a picture too sharp for Vanessa to survive untouched. Claire was skeptical when I suggested a drive. Her eyes narrowed in that way teenagers have when they suspect a parent of trying to force a heart-to-heart. "Where?" she asked, her tone guarded. "Somewhere that remembers us," I said. We crossed the bridge out of Boston, watching the skyline shrink in the rearview mirror. The further we drove, the more the city air loosened its grip. Less exhaust, more wood smoke, a faint sweetness from leaves starting to turn. Brookside looked exactly as I had left it. Crooked mailboxes leaning like old men in the wind. Porches with peeling paint that no one ever got around to fixing. The same hardware store still handwriting receipts in smudged ink. I pulled up in front of the old house. The porch sagged a little deeper than before, but the squeaky step was still there, waiting to give you away. Claire stepped out, her lips twitching into a smile before she could stop it. "You used to trip on that every morning," I said. She rolled her eyes, but there was warmth in it. "Only because you never fixed it." We walked the length of the street. Mrs. Ellery still had her wind chimes, their faint music threading through the breeze. The diner still smelled like burnt coffee and cinnamon rolls, just as it had the morning we first brought Claire there in her pajamas. The owner recognized us instantly, sliding 2 mugs across the counter without even asking what we wanted. He remembered Claire's birthday without checking the calendar, the way small-town people do. I didn't say a single bad word about Vanessa. I didn't have to. Every street corner, every familiar face whispered the truth about roots, about knowing who you are when no one's watching. Claire leaned back in the booth, sipping her hot chocolate, and for the first time in months, I saw her breathe like the weight on her chest had eased just a little. "I miss it," she said quietly on the drive back. "You'll have it again," I told her. "When the time's right, the house is yours, in trust. No one can touch it." That night, I sat in the driveway long after Claire went inside. The house wasn't just for her, it was an anchor for both of us, proof that not everything could be taken away. I called David. "Set up the transfer," I said. "Slow and clean." He reminded me. "Slow and clean," I repeated. Because sometimes patience isn't just a virtue, it's the sharpest weapon you can wield. The courthouse smelled exactly the same as it had the day of the verdict. Stale paper, burnt coffee, and a faint trace of resignation that clung to the walls like old paint. Claire sat beside me, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles blanched. She had written out what she wanted to say in careful, measured handwriting. Every sentence had been rehearsed, her words chosen like stepping stones across a river she knew could swallow her whole if she slipped. But none of it mattered. Judge Coleman leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting over her as if she were just another item on the docket. Vanessa's attorney spoke in polished, predictable phrases: stable environment, continuity of care, best interests of the child. Claire never got to read a single word from her page. Coleman waved it off, citing a sealed report that, by law, I wasn't allowed to see. I caught the flicker in Vanessa's eyes when the report was mentioned. It was quick, but it was there, the quiet satisfaction of someone holding a card no one else could see. My lawyer objected, arguing how we could counter a claim we weren't even allowed to examine. Coleman's response was a shrug disguised as judicial authority. Beside me, Claire's shoulders straightened, but her voice stayed locked behind her teeth. I saw it in her expression, the exact moment she understood the system wasn't built to protect her. It was built to manage her. When the gavel came down, Vanessa gathered her papers with the smug efficiency of someone who had just secured another win. Claire and I walked out without looking back. On the courthouse steps, I knelt so we were eye to eye. "This isn't the end," I told her. "It feels like it," she said quietly. "It's just a page in a file, that's all," I replied. "And files, they can get thicker." That night, I called Dr. Alexis Morneau. I told her I wanted Claire to have full-time, premium sessions, no limits, no waiting lists, no excuses. And I made one request: keep me at arm's length unless it was essential. Claire needed a place where she could speak freely, a place untouched by the war between her parents. Alexis agreed, but only after I promised I wouldn't turn therapy into strategy. I kept my word. But deep down, I knew that helping Claire heal wasn't just about her well-being. It was about making her unbreakable. And an unbreakable Claire was the one thing Vanessa could never control. Revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it works best when it whispers again and again until the other person can't sleep without hearing it. The court had given Vanessa numbers, cold and unfeeling. I decided to give her process, something she would feel every month, every week, every single step of her carefully curated life. The health insurance clause, I downgraded her plan from gold tier to catastrophic coverage. Perfectly legal, perfectly within the decree. It meant her co-pays spiked, her routine checkups came with bills big enough to sting, and any unexpected procedure would land like a punch to the ribs. The mortgage payments, I sent them through a trust account at the bank branch farthest from Fairview Heights. The funds arrived exactly on time, but always as cashier's checks requiring in-person pickup. Each month, she'd have to stand at that counter, smile for the tellers, and sign her name while knowing they all understood why she was there. The spousal support, the armored truck delivery was just my opening act. I began rotating denominations, 1 month rolls of coins, the next crisp $2 bills, then a stack of money orders so thick they needed a binder clip. Each delivery came with an itemized manifest stamped with my business logo, a quiet reminder of exactly who was controlling the terms. Even the child support trust played its part. Claire could access whatever she needed instantly, but every request bypassed Vanessa entirely. School trip, paid directly to the school, soccer cleats, mailed from the store with the receipt addressed to Claire, not her mother. Vanessa's role in those moments was reduced to nothing more than a bystander. Not a single line of the decree was crossed. There was no technical violation, nothing she could take back to Judge Coleman. But the accumulation of these inconveniences was its own kind of pressure, and I could see it in her eyes the next time we crossed paths in the courthouse lobby. She knew. She knew this wouldn't fade. It wouldn't burn out. It would grind her down bit by bit until the friction became unbearable. Small cuts don't make headlines, but over time, they bleed just the same. Rico's calls were never long, just enough to plant an image in my mind, the kind that stayed there long after the line went dead. "Tuesday night," he said. 7:30. Blinds down, lights low, same crew as before, Vanessa, 2 partners, and that paralegal with the red hair. Champagne this time. Somebody had a Bluetooth speaker going, sounded like jazz. I didn't need to ask how he knew. His cleaning crew had the contract for the entire building. All he had to do was work slow, empty a trash bin or two on the 5th floor after hours, and keep his ears open. The Boston skyline at night is a cold kind of beautiful. Glass towers glowing from within, each lit window a private world. Through Rico's quiet descriptions, I could almost see it. The soft amber light inside that office, the shadows moving close together, the occasional silhouette framed against the blinds. It was the kind of scene that could be explained 100 different ways, all of them innocent, until you had enough of them to reveal the pattern. Rico had started keeping a meticulous log, dates, times, names, even the brands of wine and champagne he pulled from the recycling bin. "You'd be amazed what people throw away when they think no one's looking," he told me. I didn't ask for photos, not yet. The goal wasn't to blow it open, not while the timing could still be sharpened. Information is like fruit. It's sweeter when you let it ripen, when you wait until it's just heavy enough to fall into your hands. That night, I drove past the building myself. From the street, the 5th floor was nothing more than a rectangle of golden light suspended in the cold glass. But knowing who was inside and imagining exactly what they were doing turned that light into something sharper, more dangerous. By the time I got home, I knew exactly how I would use it. Not in court. Coleman wouldn't care. The court didn't deal in truth, it dealt in rules. But outside those walls, in Vanessa's world of prestige and optics, the right truth, dropped at the right moment, could undo everything she had built. And I planned to be the one holding the clock. Some people think leverage comes from having one explosive piece of evidence. One photo, one recording, one secret that can destroy someone in a single night. They're wrong. Real leverage isn't a bomb. It's a collection of small blades, each sharp enough to draw just a little blood. And when you have enough of them, the cuts begin to add up. Rico's log was filling in like clockwork. The dates when Vanessa stayed late. The same names appearing beside hers again and again. The frequency of those closed blind nights. Add in the champagne brands, the carefully chosen jazz playlists, even the receipts from a high-end catering service that delivered after hours. Individually, those details meant nothing. Together, they painted a picture that could make her firm's PR department sweat bullets. While Rico quietly gathered from the inside, I worked another angle, her reputation in the neighborhood. Fairview Heights ran on image. Appearances weren't just important, they were currency. I called in a favor from a friend on the HOA board, a woman named Leela who still nursed a grudge from the time Vanessa forgot to invite her to a wine-tasting party. I fed her a few lines about the armored truck deliveries, framed as concern over security risks in the community. It didn't take long. Within days, the whispers started, suggestions that Vanessa's finances might not be as pristine as she liked to project. In a place like Fairview Heights, reputation is glass. Once a crack appears, people stop asking if it will break and start wondering when. At the same time, I had David look into her firm's charitable partnerships. Vanessa loved being photographed handing oversized checks to nonprofits, her smile perfectly staged for the local business pages. We found one charity with a strict policy. Board members had to certify they'd never been involved in any workplace misconduct investigation. It was a simple fact, and if those 5th floor nights could be framed in just the right light, that little fact might quietly lock her out of one of her favorite stages. I wasn't trying to detonate her life all at once. That would have been too quick, too merciful. I wanted her to feel the walls close in slowly, one quiet click at a time. The kind of pressure you can't point to in court but can't ignore in your gut. By the end of the month, Vanessa had called me twice, not to negotiate, but to clarify certain terms of the decree. I gave her nothing but polite, documented answers. She hung up both times, sounding less like a victor and more like someone trying not to admit she'd started to worry. The campaign was working. Claire's 16th birthday was coming up, and Vanessa had turned it into a production worthy of a magazine spread. Catered brunch, custom invitations, a professional photographer who specialized in lifestyle events. It wasn't about Claire, not really. It was about Vanessa showing Fairview Heights that she was the kind of mother whose parties belonged on the glossy pages of society columns. I had no intention of competing with that spectacle. I wanted something quieter, sharper. 2 weeks before the party, I began sending out a stack of envelopes. Each was hand-addressed in my neatest print, the return label reading, the Claire Kane Education Fund. Inside, a simple birthday card for Claire, signed by friends, old neighbors from Brookside, and a few of my business associates she'd met over the years. Each card held a small personal note, something heartfelt, and tucked behind each note, a crisp donation receipt for her trust fund, amounts ranging from $25 to $250. The receipts were printed clearly, stating that all funds were managed independently of her mother, dispersed only for Claire's direct benefit. I didn't send one to Vanessa. Instead, I sent 30 to people she had already invited to her brunch. On the day of the party, her guests arrived with wrapped gifts, polite smiles, and the cards. I wasn't there to see it firsthand, but Leela from the HOA made sure I got a photo. It showed Vanessa at the head of a long table, champagne flute in hand, her smile frozen mid-expression as Claire read one of the cards aloud and thanked everyone for supporting my trust fund. In that moment, the statement wasn't about the money. It was about control. It was a public reminder, in front of Vanessa's carefully curated audience, that Claire's future was secure without her involvement, that her role in her daughter's life had limits, and those limits were visible. That night, Claire called me. Her voice was brighter than I'd heard in weeks. "It was the best part of the day," she said. "Not the brunch, the cards. I didn't know people cared that much." "They care because you matter," I told her, "and because they want you to know it." Vanessa didn't call me afterward. She didn't have to. In situations like this, silence is still an answer, sometimes the loudest one of all. The idea came from David over coffee one morning. He stirred his cup slowly, the kind of pause that tells you something sharp is coming. "You're playing the long game," he said. "Might as well let the walls do some of the work for you." Massachusetts law allowed for one-party consent in recordings. If someone inside the conversation agreed to it, the recording was legal. I wasn't going to put Claire in that position, never. But there were other ways. The opportunity came through Rico. His cleaning crew rotated through various high-end homes, and once a month they serviced Vanessa's place after her post-event gatherings. One of his guys, Louis, a quiet, careful Dominican subcontractor, was invisible to people like Vanessa. She never remembered faces that didn't serve her directly. I paid Louis for an extra hour that day and handed him a Wi-Fi-enabled voice recorder, no bigger than a stick of gum. Louis didn't need a lesson. He slipped it behind the decorative books on the living room shelf, those faux antique spines that looked impressive but had never been opened. From that spot, it could catch voices drifting across the main floor without being seen. The first few recordings were mundane. Phone calls, TV chatter, the whir of a Roomba across marble tile. But in the third week, gold. Vanessa's voice, sharp with confidence, floated into the recorder. "No, I'm not worried about Marcus. He's too busy playing the good guy for Claire. The court's in my pocket and the firm would back me over him any day. Besides," a laugh, "it's not like they're going to find out about our little fifth-floor club." I didn't need to know who they were. I didn't need the full list of names. All I needed was her, on record, tying the after-hours gatherings to something worth hiding. I didn't send it anywhere, not yet. This wasn't evidence for court. This was insurance, pure and simple. The kind you lock away until the exact moment it can ruin someone without leaving your fingerprints on the wreckage. When I told David, he leaned back and gave me a look that was equal parts approval and warning. Careful, walls that listen can also talk too soon. I smiled. That's why I own the walls now. Leaks never start with a flood. They start with drips small enough to ignore, just loud enough to notice. I'd been sitting on Rico's logs and Lewis's recording for weeks, letting the weight of them settle like stones in my pocket. When I finally moved, it wasn't with a bang, but with a quiet nudge. The first drip was an anonymous email to the firm's compliance officer. The subject line was simple: unscheduled fifth-floor gatherings. The body of the email read, "Might want to check the security camera logs for after-hours events. Fifth floor, Tuesdays and Thursdays, it's all there. No signature, no traceable trail, just enough to make someone wonder." The beauty of corporate paranoia is that it doesn't take proof to get the gears turning, only the hint of a liability. Within a week, Rico reported that the fifth floor was getting unannounced walkthroughs by junior managers. The champagne didn't stop, but the blinds went down faster. The laughter was quieter. The second drip came a few days later. I posted a carefully worded hypothetical on a popular Boston legal gossip forum, one frequented by paralegals and assistants. No names, no firm. Just a scenario: a married partner hosting after-hours team-building sessions with expensive alcohol and a hand-picked guest list. By lunchtime, the comments section was boiling. Speculation, rumors. "I've heard similar stories," one user wrote. Another guessed the firm outright. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Vanessa's world was built on optics, and the moment those optics clouded, the ground beneath her began to shift. One night, I drove past the office. The fifth floor was dark, maybe coincidence, maybe not. I rolled down the window, letting the cold air bite at my skin, and thought about how easy it is to turn a drip into a steady leak. Because when the walls finally give way, no one remembers the drips. They only remember the flood. Vanessa's invitations always arrived on thick cream cardstock, the kind that felt expensive just to touch. Gold-embossed lettering, overly formal script, as if weight alone could make the event important. This one was for the annual Boston Legal Aid Gala, a black-tie evening where the city's legal elite came to drink champagne, exchange favors, and pretend philanthropy was their true calling. She thrived in these rooms. The cameras, the curated laughter, the way she floated from one conversation to another like she owned the air around her. And that was exactly why I chose it as my stage. 2 weeks before the gala, I sent a discreet message to the event's board chair, Harold Ingersoll. I didn't threaten, didn't accuse. My words were polite, almost formal. "Dear Mr. Ingersoll, I was curious. Does the gala still require attendees to certify they've never been under internal review for workplace misconduct? Given recent discussions in the Boston legal community, perhaps it would be prudent to reaffirm those standards." That was all. A drop of ink in water. By the night of the gala, I was sitting in a cafe across the street, a perfect view of the valet line. Vanessa arrived in a black town car, stepping out in a crimson gown that caught every flash of the marquee lights. For a moment, she was in her element, radiant, composed, the perfect image she had spent years cultivating. But then Harold appeared. He intercepted her at the entrance. No raised voices, no scene, just a brief exchange, his face all business. Her smile tightened by degrees like glass cracking under pressure. And then, without stepping inside, she turned back toward the car. She didn't go in. Later, I learned she had been asked to sit this one out until certain questions were resolved internally. In other words, the gala wasn't willing to risk being photographed with her, not when whispers had already started making their rounds. I didn't have to spread the story. In her circles, absence was a statement all its own. People noticed who wasn't there just as much as who was. That night, I sent Claire a text. Sometimes the best move is not to show up. She didn't understand it then, but she would. Reputation doesn't shatter in silence. It cracks where people can see it. And once the crack is there, no one forgets where it started. 2 days after the gala incident, a small legal blog ran a piece, barely 100 words. It was almost a throwaway post. High-profile attorney absent from charity circuit amid internal questions. No names, no firm, but in the comments, the guessing game began. Within an hour, Vanessa's name was there in black and white, posted by someone who clearly thought they were being clever. By evening, the article had been shared on LinkedIn, where polite speculation wore the mask of professional concern. I didn't plant the story. I didn't have to. I'd only loosened the bolts. Gravity did the rest. Then came the HOA meeting. Normally, Vanessa avoided them, sending a proxy if she bothered at all. But this month, she showed up, probably hoping to project stability, to remind everyone she was still in control. Bad choice. The meeting had barely started when Leela, never one to waste an audience, raised a hand and voiced security concerns about an armored truck making regular stops at a certain residence. She never said Vanessa's name. She didn't have to. Every eye in the room turned toward her anyway. Someone else asked if this had anything to do with that trust fund situation for Claire. The question hung in the air like a match over dry grass. Vanessa tried to laugh it off, but her laugh had an edge now, not charm, not confidence, panic. She left the meeting early, citing a work emergency, though I knew her firm had been oddly quiet with her lately. A week later, Rico told me the fifth-floor gatherings had nearly vanished. They don't trust each other up there now, he said. Too many side eyes, too many questions. I didn't celebrate. This wasn't about winning yet. It was about erosion, wearing down her foundation until it was too brittle to hold. The real strike would come when she thought the worst had passed, when she let herself believe she was safe again. For now, I was content to let the cracks widen in full view, each one a public reminder that once control slips away, it's almost impossible to get it back. Most people think revenge is about taking something away. Sometimes it's about giving something, just not to the person who's been waiting for it. My father's will was simple, split the assets between me and my sister, Alina. But what Vanessa never knew was that Dad had named me executor with full discretion over certain family properties. One of those properties was a small but valuable piece of land in Cape Ann. Ocean views. Prime real estate, the kind of place developers salivate over. A sale could be completed in weeks, and the payout would be enough to buy something new or bail someone out of trouble. Vanessa had always looked at that land like it was her safety net. In her mind, it was ours, a cushion she could lean on if things got tight. Back when we were married, she'd even floated the idea of selling it to open new opportunities for her career. So I sold it. But not to her. The buyer was Alina's son, my nephew Daniel, still family, but far enough removed from Vanessa to make any claim of hers laughable. The deal was clean, legal, and quick. I structured it so that part of the proceeds went directly into Claire's trust, untouchable and irrevocable. The rest funded a college scholarship in my parents' name. On paper, it was a family legacy project. In reality, it was a surgical strike. Word reached Vanessa within days. She called me, her voice tight and cold, the kind of tone she used when she was trying not to scream. That land was supposed to be for us. There is no us, I said evenly. And the trust for Claire is irrevocable. You can't touch it. Her silence on the line was heavy, a pause thick with the realization that she'd just lost something she'd quietly counted on for years. You're doing this to hurt me, she said finally. No, I told her. I'm doing this so Claire never has to depend on you. But the truth, yes, it was to hurt her. Not financially, she'd still live comfortably, but symbolically. This wasn't just land. This was the illusion of control she had been holding onto, the quiet confidence that she could always get what she wanted in the end. Now she knew she couldn't. And in her world, that kind of loss was priceless. Shifts in loyalty rarely happen with declarations. They happen in whispers, soft rewrites of a story people thought they knew, until one day the story is entirely different. The first shift came from Harold in Jersall, the same man who had intercepted Vanessa at the charity gala and politely turned her away. 2 weeks later, he reached out through David, asking if we could meet off the record. We met at an old Beacon Hill steakhouse, the kind of place where the wood paneling smelled faintly of cigar smoke from decades past, and every booth was deep enough to hide a conversation. I've known Vanessa a long time, Harold began, his voice low but steady. But the last year, certain patterns are hard to ignore. He didn't elaborate, but I didn't need him to. The subtext was clear. People in his circle were no longer willing to stake their reputations on hers. He leaned in slightly. You strike me as a man who plans his moves. If there's a better use for my influence, I'm listening. I didn't give him details. I didn't need to. In situations like this, even the offer of an open door is enough. The second shift came from within her own firm. Rico mentioned a young associate named Megan, bright, ambitious, who had been frozen out of key projects after politely declining an invitation to one of the fifth-floor after-hours gatherings. Word of her exclusion had spread, and it had left a sour taste in more than a few mouths. Through a mutual contact, Megan reached out to me, carefully, cautiously. She offered to clarify timelines if it ever became necessary. I told her to keep her head down for now, but I logged every date, every name she mentioned. Even Leela from the HOA, once just a convenient gossip channel, had started talking like she was rooting for me. Over coffee, she leaned in and said, "Vanessa's not as untouchable as she thinks. People remember who shows up for them and who doesn't." I didn't have to recruit any of these people. They were turning on their own. All I did was make sure the truth had enough room to breathe. And once the truth starts making friends, it starts moving all by itself. Vanessa hadn't noticed the ground shifting beneath her yet. But that's the thing about power. It's not the moment you lose it that destroys you. It's realizing, far too late, that it was already gone. The final piece didn't come from Rico's logs or Lewis's recordings. It came from timing. For months, I had let the fifth-floor gathering simmer, never quite boiling, never quite going cold, just warm enough to stay in the shadows of Vanessa's reputation. But that night, everything lined up. A Tuesday, after hours, the blinds already drawn. Rico sent me a single text now. I wasn't there in person. I didn't need to be. I'd already arranged for a private security consultant, someone who understood how to stay entirely within the law while still getting what mattered. His method was precise. Position himself in the public alley across from the building, use a long lens aimed through the narrow gap between the blinds, and let the scene speak for itself. What he captured would look almost mundane to anyone who didn't know the context. A table with an open bottle of champagne, 4 people in close conversation, Vanessa leaning against the corner of the table with her hand resting casually on a colleague's arm. But the timestamps told a different story. They matched the firm's billable hours log for a late client strategy session. That was the problem and the opportunity. I packaged the material carefully, still frames, timestamps, and a short, polite letter addressed to the managing partners of the firm. The letter reads simply, "I believe you'll want to review this in light of your current internal policies." No signature, no return address. The delivery came from a law office in another state, routed through 3 forwarding services. 3 days later, Rico called. "The 5th floor's a ghost town after 6 p.m. They even took down the blinds like they're trying to prove something." Vanessa never confronted me directly, but her attorney sent me an email dressed in legal jargon, thinly veiling the personal venom underneath. Cease any further interference with my client's professional activities. I didn't respond, not in writing, not in words, because the truth was I wasn't interfering anymore. The 5th floor had already poured its last glass, and the fallout? It was doing my work for me. It didn't happen all at once. Revenge stories like to pretend there's a single dramatic moment, a gavel slamming, a crowd gasping when everything shifts. In real life, the turn is quieter. Vanessa's name began disappearing from the firm's press releases. The invites she used to treat as inevitable stopped arriving. At HOA meetings, she was no longer the center of gravity, more a cautionary tale murmured about after she left the room. Even the 5th floor, once her private kingdom, became just another slab of carpet and glass locked up by 6 o'clock sharp. Claire noticed it too, not from headlines, there weren't any, but in the subtler ways. The way her mother stopped performing when they were together. The way her voice lost that edge of superiority, replaced by something she'd never called defeat, but we both knew it when we saw it. One Saturday morning, Claire and I drove back to Brookside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves and wood smoke. The porch still creaked in the same spot. The diner still burned the coffee. We sat in our old booth, just the two of us, talking about nothing that mattered, no lawyers, no court orders, no strategy. "Do you think it's over?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "It's balanced," I said. "That's enough. Because revenge isn't about erasing the past. It's about tilting the scales back to where they should be and making sure they stay there." I didn't need Vanessa to apologize. I didn't need her to admit anything. The silence around her said more than words ever could. She was still standing, but the ground beneath her had shifted, and for the rest of her life she'd be feeling for cracks. As for me, I wasn't planning the next strike. I was done. Sometimes victory isn't a roar, it's the quiet, steady knowledge that you've taken back everything they thought they owned, including the narrative. And so it ended quietly. No headlines, no courtroom victory speeches, just a balance restored. Her power faded without a single public blow, and my daughter and I reclaimed the life she thought she could take from us. Because revenge isn't always about destruction, it's about making sure the scales finally tip back where they belong. What about you? In my place, would you have done the same or gone further? Share your thoughts below. This is Cheating Stories 7. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.